Hi, I'm Julia Bruton. This is about We Are Woman, a podcast exploring female and new aspects on the topic of VR.
Hello, everyone out there, to a new episode of VR Woman. And I am very, very, very excited today because a pioneer in VR was able to be our guest today, Jacki Morie. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for being a part of VR Woman. You've been doing VR more or less since the beginning of VR, since the 90s, early 90s. And as we usually ask our guests to tell a little bit about their background and their approach to VR, I guess with you this would be an episode of its own. But just shortly from your side, what would you like to share in terms of your background and how you found your way to virtual reality?
Well, I've always considered myself both an artist and a scientist. I've been interested in both areas since I was a little kid. But I really think the art comes first for me. So I have been doing artwork for years. I was a photographer, did a lot of photography work, but I was also building these assemblages, these kind of little physical small things. And I kept designing them bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, I also got into computer graphics because I wanted to look at it as an image making tool. And we're talking in the early 80s now. I had bought an Apple II computer and I was using it to both program a little bit, but also using some graphics programs to make images on the screen. Now, they weren't much. They were, a lot of pixels. So I think you had maybe less than 300 pixels across back then. And so I did a project for my master's thesis in art that looked at taking pictures of the screen with those giant pixels and then taking them into the darkroom and printing in more photographic elements like people or landscapes or whatever. So from there, I got into doing 3D modeling and animation. And I realized that those assemblage boxes that I was making and designing bigger and bigger with no place to store them could be done as 3D models. Mm-hmm. And that I could then take pictures in stereo and have people look at the 3D models in stereo.
Okay.
Then came VR. And I went, oh my gosh, I can do this in VR. I always wanted to bring people into the environments I was building, and I wanted them to have a very strong emotional component. And by being able to bring people into these virtual environments, I was able to really control what they would experience in them. So I was able to put in things that were part of my art, but also things that were very emotionally evocative.
I read your thesis, and there are many, many amazing thoughts in there. When we're speaking about virtual reality, is it more a medium or is it a technology?
It's a medium that is enabled by certain technologies, but it's not the technology. It certainly is a more encompassing medium than almost anything we've ever had, except maybe architecture or things that can truly envelop and encompass you. But the technology changes, so you really can't say it's a technology. I mean, we've got computers, but that immersive medium is what we designed for. And that immersive medium has so many opportunities for artists, creators to bring something to the participants in those environments. And that's why it is a unique medium. It's a medium that is based on embodiment. I mean, it is the only medium that's really tracking where you're looking, where your body's headed, where your focus is. And those are things that you can't really get out of other mediums that we've had traditionally, like cinema or even a book, which is very immersive. But what you can do with this unique medium of virtual reality is absolutely, it's just unexplored and something that we really need to be looking at more. And that's why I'm very excited for what's happened with virtual reality in the last 10 years, where there are so many more people looking at it critically and creatively and being able to add more interesting things to the kinds of experiences we can have. So, going beyond first person shooter games or even fitness apps, let's look at this medium, which is truly unique and embodied and something that can be so meaningful to us as human beings. Let's look at how we can add meaning to these immersive environments and immersive media.
Speaking about your work, can you speak to the listeners a little bit more where you applied this within your own work, actually, to show and to experience the wholenessness of it? Yeah.
When I first started working in VR, we were doing very simple perceptual studies. And I was doing that with some Army research scientists at a research lab in Orlando, Florida. And you couldn't even really see well in virtual reality at that time. It's 1990. We put eye charts in there, and you were basically legally blind when you read those eye charts. It was a very compelling feeling to be somewhere that wasn't real, but to feel like it was real. But what I found was they were very boring, these environments. You could fly over a virtual town, but there was nobody to talk to. There was nothing really interesting there. You couldn't go in a coffee shop. And so I set out on a journey to figure out how to put emotion into these virtual environments. And that's what I was doing after hours. So I was working, on these perceptual studies in the daytime, but after hours, I partnered with another researcher at this lab in Orlando, and we set out to build different environments, each of which evoked a different emotional response to see if we could do it, because nobody was doing it. And so we came up with this piece called Virtopia, and Virtopia was a series of, well, I think we designed about a dozen environments and we only got about 6 of them built. But each environment had a different flavor to it. So some were nostalgic, some were angst. They were designed to provoke angst. One was a 30-foot high spider that we wanted to see if we could get fear. This is a 30-foot high cartoon spider in VR. But you have a headset on, so this spider is in your face. And we pioneered a lot of techniques to enhance that emotional response in participants. So for the spider, for example, it had 8 states. It could ignore you. It could be interested in you. It could be coming after you. It could be going away from you. And what we did for each state, and these were kind of randomly generated depending on your motions in the VR space. So if you were coming at the spider aggressively, it might come back at you aggressively. Each of these states, we put a different heart rate. So you could hear the heart rate as if it was your heart rate. And if the spider was attacking you, that heart rate was very, very fast. Mm-hmm. If it was ignoring you, it was very, very slow. And on the principle of entrainment, which is where your heart rate syncs up with some beat that you're hearing, we found that it really did enhance that emotional response. And some people got very scared in the spider experience and would take the headset off and go, I'm not going back there. This is a cartoon spider. But we knew we were onto something. And we showed this, it was the first VR ever shown at a film festival. So the Florida Film Festival in 1993 and 1994, they invited us back. They were very future oriented, and we were able to put a lot of people through that VR experience of Virtopia, which again had a number of different experiences in it. So that was the first thing. The next one I did was for my dissertation. Well, the next personal piece I did was for my dissertation. It was called The Memory Stairs. And The Memory Stairs was kind of like Virtopia in that it was a series of different virtual environments, each designed to represent some aspect of being alive. So from before birth to near death. And so the first experience was in the womb. So you couldn't really see much. It was very blurry, and you heard two heartbeats, yours and your mother's, and you could hear things, but everything was coming through like liquid. So we had an argument that was happening out there. We had a mom singing a lullaby, and the next one was called Just New. You were in a crib and you were looking up at the mobile that was spinning around, and all these people's faces would come in and out, cooing at you, singing to you. What we did for that one was add smells. So the general smell when you were in the crib was baby powder. But when your mother's face came into the crib, you smelled her perfume, which was my mother's perfume. So it was very meaningful for me. We also had some very old rooms, like you were visiting your grandmother's house, and those had a smell of age and fireplace smells that were long gone. And that one also had a ticking clock that ticked at about half speed. So everything slowed down when you were in this space. So those are the kinds of things, techniques and approaches that I've tried to work on with my personal work. But I also was able to develop those at another research lab I worked at and helped start the USC Institute for Creative Technologies. So we stood that up in 1999, and I was a senior researcher there in VR for about 14 years. And I had a very large project called the Sensory Environments Evaluation Project, where we looked at bringing in more senses to see if we could make things feel more cognitively real. So, you go into these things, you're in a space, you're playing a game, you're in a virtual reality and that everything's really safe. But we wanted to kind of up the feeling that there was some real consequences to your actions. So that's what I was able to do for about 6-7 years there at the Institute for Creative Technologies. And there's a lot of papers on what we did there. It was all in the context of bringing more meaning and more emotion into these worlds. And again, that's really what they need. They're not, as you said, a technology. They are a medium, and a medium is designed to affect us as participants, as consumers of that medium. And so what do you want in your mediums? You want something that hits you somewhere, that has some meaning for you, emotion or catharsis or healing or therapy, whatever it is. There's so much potential in VR as a medium. And we haven't even yet begun to understand how it affects us. I always say we've underestimated the brain's plasticity, and VR is a way to unlock it. By having really key VR experiences, we can change the way you think. We can change the way you perceive yourself in the real world. So there are many stories of people who have worked in with their avatar in certain experiences and come out changed for it. And if you do that on a consistent basis, whether it's meditation or therapy or whatever, you are going to change the way your brain operates, the way those neurons fire. And this is so powerful. We've never had a medium this powerful before.
The question is in what direction, right? Do you lead it? Do you lead it in let's say, in quotes, good directions, meaningful directions, or do you lead it in other directions? But speaking about your work also as a researcher and looking back, do you believe that there is different approaches by women or men towards this medium? And if so, in what ways? Is there something that you specifically maybe could have observed or realized over the time that you've worked in the field?
One of the things I did for my dissertation, which was done by 2007, was look at the first 100 artistic VR works that had been made. And it was, back then, believe it or not, we had the internet, but it was really hard to find documentation on these things. And of course, any VR experience has a shelf life of a couple of years before the technology has galloped away and you can't experience it anymore. But of these 100 first pieces that I found, about 65 of them, so more than half, were led by, done by, created by, designed by women. And I really started scratching my head about that and going, well, why this? Because I could easily have taken another 100 that were more commercial or game-like or entertainment-based, and I would bet you that many of those, or the majority of those, would have been led by male teams, or headed up by someone that was male. But I wanted to know why the artistic ones tended to skew to female creators. And my theory on that is, if you really do a VR experience with all of the possibilities and affordances of virtual reality, I mean, these are not authored worlds that run a particular storyline necessarily. They are experiences where you make choices, where you have some open-ended possibilities there. And I think that's easier for women to let go of that control aspect, whereas a filmmaker or a game maker, they definitely want you to follow along with what they want you to experience. But in VR, you can make choices. You might never see this. You might really focus in on one aspect, or like this thing, or just choose your own path through these worlds. So I think making an open-ended world that allows the participant to have their own choices and not be a dogmatic auteur is more conducive to women. And why do I think that? Well, women, when you have a kid, and I know this is not just for women that have children, but I think it's inherent in some of our genetic makeup. You cannot tell that kid what to do every second of the day. You don't author that kid. You provide the kid an environment where they can become. And I think that's so aligned with what VR as a medium is. So that's why I think there are many women creators, especially in the more, meaningful, emotional kinds of experiences. So we have lots of creators on both sides, but I think we tend on the female creator side to things that are more poignant, if you will.
Yeah, I tend to have an idea in the same way, and I'm always trying to, when I go to festivals, to see how it develops. And I feel like, just looking at the last 4 years, in many festivals, they are trying. Well, I'm not sure what they're actually trying to do, but they were a lot more experimental in the beginning, and a lot more diverse pieces, and, things that might have not worked out so perfectly at the beginning. And now when I go to festivals, they all look, very fancy and has great graphics, and work from the coding perfectly, but they give me less air to breathe, less space to look around, less possibilities to involve my senses. Is it something that you would agree with? Maybe I also have to say, mostly I'm looking at European festivals, so I don't know so much about the States at the moment. But yeah, I'd love to hear your intake on that one, especially also when you said that in 1993 there was the first festival, that you were a part of, in terms of how things might have changed from then, because I can only speak of 4 years.
Right. Well, I do think that the festival showings of what is called virtual reality have gotten more polished, more set in their ways. Certainly, they've taken on many of the characteristics of what else that festival is showing, mostly cinema, right? So those are authored things. So they want a polished thing that fits the sensibilities of their audience. And I think there is less room for innovation and much more. We think we have this down. We know what the vocabulary of virtual reality is, but it's an evolving medium. So I don't think anybody has that. Now, in North America, probably the best and most experimental immersive film or immersive content festival is 5Rs. So 5Rs is FIVARS. I don't remember what it stands for, but this is run by Kira Malecki Sanchez in Canada. And they really are looking for those edgy pieces, those things that are not polished, those things that are still exploring the potential of the medium. And they do it with web VR, so you can actually go to some of these things online through your web browser or your headset, and it's just an amazing festival. So I always tell my students or creators I know to put their work in that festival because, and it's 10 years now, so there is this repository of all of these amazing, crazy things that have been in 5Rs. And some of those people have gone on to build careers in building VR content. But it's just amazing, everything from 360 video to mixed reality to web-based VR to totally immersive stuff. I think everything from Attenborough's nature things to one of my favorite pieces was called Webbies, I think it was, and it was a tour of everything the internet gives you as a theme park. So you could go to the purchasing, the shop part, or you could go to the social part, or you could, and it was all narrated by this little AI angel agent. And it was just, and it was from some European creators, and it's still one of my favorite pieces. And just to kind of get that look of what the internet means to us from a very different perspective, from like the 35,000 foot perspective. Anyway, so 5Rs is one that allows for a lot more experimentation. The ones that are, they've got a big reputation to defend, so they're going to do the things that fit in with their chief audience.
Yeah, I mean, the only question is if that kind of gives justice to the new medium, and if it's possible, to have discussions, fruitful discussions in terms of new ideas, the medium itself, rather than to have. I'm going to say name dropping and describe great visuals. But I definitely agree. Those festivals that started just as XR festivals, they have a very different approach than those ones where there was, first of all, a film festival, and then, they became like an extra add-on with an immersive section or something like that. And documentary festivals. I also have to say that most of the time, they also have a very experimental approach and different approach, and show huge diversity in terms of what's possible and what's not. And also speaking about it as a medium, right? It's not so much about the perfect resolution or the reality graphics that we see. It's so much more how everything works together, how it speaks to us. And I think this is exactly what you mean when you use the word meaning. That's what kind of exists in me and speaks to me, and I will take it out for me, and some other person is going to take something differently out of it. And so just a little sidewalk to the festivals. But speaking about the discourse, and how important do you think, especially at the moment now, is an exchange for people, for example, who come the first time with this medium in touch. Would you say there is a difference between someone having the goggles at home, doing it on their own, going on the platforms, or maybe being in an environment like a festival or some other gathering, right, where there maybe also are the creators present that can then speak with you and get into an exchange? Do you think there is a difference at the moment, or also for later?
I think you're onto something here where we haven't until recently had more people experiencing VR in their home environments than at a social event. So even when the Oculus Rift came out, there were all of these gatherings where you could try it and then you would be talking to people or there'd be a panel. So there was VRLA out here, and even Indiecade, the game festival, had VR in those early days. And there were often discussions about that happened in that social setting that are not happening in the home environment. So now you're much more a consumer.
Mhm.
And I think I hadn't thought about this before, but that discourse about what you're experiencing and the value and the quality and the meaning of it, we don't really have ways to do that. Now, I did have some friends who started something called the Look Club, and they would, every couple weeks, they'd get in headsets and they'd try something and they'd talk about it while they were doing it. I don't think they're doing that anymore, but they're all still working in either in VR or in that kind of bringing content to people about valuing it. But not enough of that is happening. I think the social aspects of VR are much more about shared interests and not about the medium itself. So there's room for that. Maybe, I teach immersive experience design, so we talk about a lot of those issues. But I think that we need to go bigger. We need to have a place where creators can actually come and discuss some of the issues that they're having. How do I get to this? How do I bring this little emotional element that I want people to experience? How do I do that? How do I bring that into the environment that I'm creating? So I know I've been toying with the idea of some, not quite master classes, but more classes where we can start to help creators look at that bigger picture. It's interesting to me that many of the bigger titles that are out there are people who've already made their name in some other medium. And because they've got that name recognition, they get the funding to do these things. But they also bring all the baggage of that other medium. And it's rare, although not impossible. There have been some really wonderful things where the people from another medium actually go beyond that. They transcend that medium and bring some new stuff to virtual reality. But I think there's voices out there we haven't heard yet. There's certainly more diversity than we have right now. And those discussions are not going to happen at home unless we bring something to the people. So this is my plea to see who would be interested in participating in that kind of thing. That we have some real big, like Kieran Malecki Sanchez would be part of that with his, he not only runs the 5 Hours Festival, but the Virtual Reality Toronto Conference, which is happening this summer. So he does bring those kinds of discussions, but you still have to go to those events to get those discussions. And I'd like to bring those discussions to the creators
to the
so that they
creators,
reach the
yes.
widest possible
I mean,
audience.
it's a wonderful idea, Jackie. Let's stick with that a little bit longer, also after our podcast, because there is this amazing possibility to actually meet in social VR. So that means we could exactly bring those discussions into VR and talk about VR. I really, really like this idea so much. I always get the question, oh, VR, where is it going? How do you make money with it? That's a very, very good question. And I think from my side, it's something that is going to develop while we develop the medium itself, while we, approach it in those ways that you also talked about today. And I have trouble, looking at the VR experiencer, like, for example, a cinema viewer, right? And say there is number X for film, Y, because it's such an individual medium, right? Every individual puts on the goggles and then has an individual experience. With your knowledge and also maybe your insights and gut feeling, where do you think on an economical level can we go with this medium? And does it necessarily have to be in any way compared to a film industry?
There are so many ways virtual reality can be used and benefit people. And that's why it's so hard to pin it down as an economic model. I mean, for film, we've got it's entertainment. For games, it's entertainment. VR makes incredible inroads into the whole health sector. I mean, certainly VR for therapy is well known and has been, and VR for training, for surgery training, for all kinds of training, that is definitely an economic model. But it's not the sexy stuff we hear about, it's like there are companies making good money creating training programs for different companies. There are VR sports things, the thing is that there are all these verticals. And so people are trying to say, how do you make money in VR? Well, you just got to think about the different areas that VR can serve. It's kind of this malleable technology that can be used for very important things like therapy, like training, like giving you a way to improve your mood, with things like Trip, the kind of meditation softwares that are out there. So it's not, how does VR, I mean, VR makes money. It may not make money with an experimental piece that's trying something new. It may not make money on something that's very artistic because, unless you're in a gallery with somebody selling your work, you're not going to make a lot of money from art, unless you're in that art world. We don't have that art world for VR yet. And part of that is a problem of archiving. So this is a medium that's moving rapidly. As I said, the shelf life of a VR experience is 2 to 3 years. And then sometimes they take the experiences off the shelf even before they're ready to retire. I'm still so upset that BOGO is no longer available on the Quest, because that was one that I always gave my students to look at in terms of all of the affordances and how well they don't tell you what to do, but you know what to do just based on the way they've designed it. But no, they decided to retire BOGO. None of the VR I've ever made can be experienced again. It just doesn't keep up with the technology advances. Now, you can do that. Certainly, Shar Davies has been able to update her mid-1990s works. I think this is the third time now, but that's a lot of money and a lot of programming to make it future proof. And most pieces don't have the funding to do that, to keep up with that. Even if a museum buys a piece, and we've only had a few examples of that, but Tamako Thiel's work is in some museums, and she has actually updated some of it, And then the museums also keep an old computer running it with that old software. So archiving is a problem with this medium, and any medium where it's gonna, if we even look at cinema, the films from the early, 1900s are not really playable anymore. You have to keep digitizing and updating, and it's just a constant thing. So I guess that's true of most artwork, unless you've got a nice marble sculpture there. Um, it's something that's starting to be looked at, but I don't think we're going to have any good solutions for it anytime soon. And it's sad because some of the most consequential virtual reality pieces, you have to look at the documentation, and that's certainly not the same as being immersed in it.
Definitely. And I just realized how important it is to really speak about the pieces, to exchange about them. Now the oral communication, because we can't have this this way of always experience it for all those times, becomes so much more important. It feels like we're back where civilization started, when we basically gave all our knowledge, from one to another.
Around the campfire.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
it's actually the premise of the VR history book that I'm working on. So that will come out hopefully by the end of the year, if I start writing again furiously. But the idea is not to talk about the history of the technology, except in a sort of an adjunct way, but to talk about the stories of the people who were involved, and what were they thinking at the time, and why were they doing it, and what was their motivation, and how did they decide to do this thing instead of that thing, and where did that idea come from? And so those are the kinds of stories that will be the foundation of the book. And there's actually going to be two books. One will go from the early days of VR to about when Palmer Luckey came out with the Rift. And then the second volume will be from there on to the future, and look at what people are doing now who were part of that original kind of creative crew that got this whole medium started. So the other thing that's going to happen with the book is I'm doing all these interviews with these people, and we're transcribing those, and the publisher's going to have those interviews online, the transcriptions. So people will be able to dig deeper into people's stories, and some of them
That's
are just
wonderful.
fascinating.
Yeah, that is amazing. And speaking about your work in the present in general, besides the book, is there anything you want to tell us about that you're working on right now, that's going on, that's being cooked in the kitchen?
Well, my house is a disaster right now because we have uncrated my artwork from the last 30, 40 years. And so this is not VR artwork. This is early photography and computer graphics that I did. And I'm bringing it out for an art salon and sale next week. So we're going to hang it all over the house, and people will be able to come in and look at it, and we'll tell stories about it, and how it, how this happened. How did you make the Apple II computer into an art device? So that's what I'm doing now.
So that's a possibility to meet you there. Where is it, and when is it?
So it is at my house, and the details can be found at the website jfmorieartwork.shop.
Okay, I will put that in the description of the podcast too. Yeah.
So it's an open house from noon to 6 on June 7th and June 8th. And should be a whole bunch of really interesting people coming by. And I have new artwork. I mean, I continually do artwork that's not VR. Some of it ends up in VR. And for example, I'm going to be showing some of the prints from my master's thesis where I used that Apple computer. That show was called Integrated Fantasies. Well, that will be in one of the rooms of the house. And I was going to say that work I actually did. My last VR work was the old house that I lived in when I created those integrated fantasy pieces. and we built the house and we hung the artwork all over the house. And you could go into the house and touch the artwork and hear me talking about how I created each of those pieces. So
I
it
love
was an
that.
interesting mix of the nostalgia and the antique art along with the new VR art. So I would
And
love to do
now,
more of that.
yes, and now the wonder, I wish I could come around. You're in LA, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I can't, but now the possibility is there to meet you in your house and to have you talk about your art. That is just a wonderful picture.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's going to be fun.
yeah, I think so too. Jacki, thank you so much for your time. We definitely got to stay in touch for the future, and I'm very much looking forward to the book when you then, hopefully at the end of the year, be able to finish it. And I wish you a wonderful day and a great time next week with your art.
Thank you so much, Julia. This has been wonderful.